Did you know that blown glass is super fascinating? Sitting with me is the foremost authority on the subject.
Hi, I'm Ferdinand Meyer V from Baltimore, Maryland, and I now live in Houston, Texas. I don't know if you remember, but a lot of us when we were children, we would get so excited when we would dig and find a penny or a nickel, or maybe it was an old bottle or a broken piece of glass or a plate. It was just so fascinating. And to take those home sometimes and fill them with pennies and put the bottles in the windows, how exciting. I never would have thought that I would have grow up and collect these types of bottles. What was once blown and used for medicine, fruit jars, inks, beer bottles, and liquor bottles, pre-Civil War and during the Civil War era, is now going to be on display at the Houston Museum of Natural Science from August 1st to August 4th, 2024. Now, some of this glass, you may ask yourself, where do you find it? Well, that's interesting because most of it is found in what we call privies. These are the old wells and dug holes on the backside or the alley side or the garage side of old sheds and property in the United States. And this is where people would throw their trash. They would burn a level, throw their trash in there, burn another level. And by the time it was full, they would move on to another spot. Well, now people go around with probes and they dig into these privies and they can go down through the 1920s, probe a little deeper, and as the steel probe goes through ash, they'll hit layers from 1900, 1880, 1870, and then they start getting to the sweet spot, which is the Civil War era and pre-Civil War era. This is when the bottles were hand-blown. Each of them was unique, and I tell you, if they weren't broken, some of these bottles can be worth thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, and there's quite a few stories on my website and other websites where these bottles are worth $250,000 or more.
And what is that website?
My website is peachridgeglass.com. I'm a past president of the Federation of Historical Bottle Collectors, FOHBC.org. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the collecting and education of early American glass. And our mantra is education.
Very good.
We are a 501(c)(3) corporation. We're international, and we have members all throughout the United States and from every age group. We all have one thing in common, and that's our passion about history and early American glass. This glass includes items that you may have found in your kitchen, items you may have bought at a local general store or your drugstore or even the local saloon. Many times these bottles were full of alcohol, heroin, opium, and all kinds of nefarious concoctions because there wasn't a Food and Drug Administration at that time.
Right.
So you would see advertising where mothers would be instructed to give their kids 2 doses of a soothing syrup to calm their babies and stop them from crying. Well, of course they'll stop crying if it's full of alcohol. Well, this caused lots of problems, but it increased the sales. What happened though, once the prohibition started coming along and people started thinking about it, the men weren't allowed to go to bars anymore. Their women and wives wouldn't let them go to bars. So what they would do, they would sneak to the medicine cabinet and drink these bottles, and they would take them out to the outhouse or the shed, and they would drink them, and they would hide them in the eaves of the barn. They would hide them between the walls. They would hide them under porches. So that's where we find a lot of these bottles. It's incredible. And then if you're lucky, some of us don't dig, you can go to your local thrift shop. I can remember 5 or 10 examples just in the Houston area alone where people have contacted me with a bottle, and I've said, wow, that's a $5,000 bottle.
Wow.
Where did you get it? And this is rather a common occurrence. Of course, 99% of the time, it's a later bottle, and I only remember the more expensive bottles, but keep looking. I personally, every time I see an old antique shop that's a little out of way, I go into it. I look at it because you never know when something fresh might come from a person's house.
How would somebody know what to look for in a thrift shop or in the dirt or wherever they're going to find these?
The biggest hint you want to look through is you want to make sure there's no threads on the top or the mouth. Because when machine-made bottles were made, they were making them with a machine and the mouths were threaded. The bottles I'm talking about all use corks.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to tell of anything, usually 1890 or earlier, 1900 or earlier. Anything later than that started to be machine-made, but still highly collectible. Do you know all the old soda bottles made in the 1920s and 1930s are extremely collectible right now?
Wow.
Now we only have, it seems like 5 or 10 national brands of cola, but back then every little city and town had a mom and pop business that made their own soda pop. Strange names with grape and dandelion and all kinds of mustard greens. And these soda bottles are extremely collectible. Not worth as much as the pre-Civil War bottles, but highly collectible. Many of them had funky names. They had funky towns that are no longer there anymore. They had great graphics on the front. Many of them are Art Deco in style. It's very exciting.
So I know many of these glass manufacturers were obviously all over the country and all over the world. Were they using sand or material that was local to them, or were they having special sand or special material shipped from other places?
The big glass manufacturing firms in the country were located where sand and timber was, because they needed a lot of fire, a lot of wood, and a lot of sand to make their glass. So you'll see the Ohio Valley, you'll see Pittsburgh, you'll see Baltimore, and upstate New York, where the big bottle manufacturing. Very rarely do you find it in the South, never in Texas. Most of the bottles we find here were made in New Orleans or made in the Northeast, shipped down the Mississippi to New Orleans and shipped over to Galveston, where they were sold in grocery stores in Houston. But they came down the Mississippi or they came around the Cape. A lot of bottles, of course, were coming from New York to San Francisco during the gold rush.
Yeah.
So some of those ships, not only were they carrying gold back from San Francisco, they were carrying bottles to San Francisco. All those miners wanted whiskey, and all those bottles were being made in New York, some of them even made in England, shipped over to the country, put on big frigates full of people going to the gold rush. On the way back, those same ships would be carrying gold, and of course, many of them sunk. So not only do you dig for gold, you dig for these bottles. It's another type of gold. Plus, these bottles are beautiful. I keep all my bottles in my windows. My collection's been on TV shows before, Extreme Collectibles, but instead of curtains, I use bottles. Every one of these bottles is a different color. I'm a color specialist. So when you think of bottles being clear, no, cobalt blue, every possible shade of amber, every possible shade of green. And when you put imperfections in these and you put them out in front of the glass with sun, they change all day long as the sun moves. Just like stained glass in a church. Yeah. When I was a child, I used to sit in church mesmerized by the stained glass, not the sermon. Yeah. Because I noticed that beautiful stained glass as the sun and cloud moves. Yeah. It was a symphony of light. So I'm a glass specialist. I design glass sculptures. I collect contemporary glass. I collect old glass, but I love glass. We're going to have glass blowing exhibits at this exhibition. We're going to have all kinds of seminars on how to make bottles. Many of these bottles weren't square or cylinder. Some of them were called figural bottles. You can remember Aunt Jemima bottles, the syrup bottles. I loved those bottles as a kid. I thought, how cool to have a bottle of syrup that way. So it was obviously made to collect. Well, the same concept happened in the 1870s. They made these same medicine bottles in the shapes of fish, Indian maidens, log cabins, lighthouses, all kinds of neat shapes. And I tell you, these, what we call figural bottles, are amazing. And we'll have quite a few of them on display at this exhibition.
I can't wait to see that. There's so many questions that pop into my mind when you're talking to an expert such as yourself, who's so obviously so passionate, which is the key ingredient in all of this, is just a passion for what you are, what your hobby is, what your, not just a hobby, what your life is. The question that I had before I forget it is, what would give the glass their unique color and attributes?
This is a question we cannot answer, because They used young children to blow this glass. There weren't labor laws back then. So we have many pictures of kids, 12 and 13-year-olds, working in dirt-filled, horrible conditions, Pittsburgh factories blowing glass. And they were paid by how many bottles they blew. Wow. So the bottles typically at that time were aquamarine, or amber. But for some reason, when they would shift to a different order, maybe a druggist wanted his bottle in cobalt blue or green, they would leave extra glass in the pots. So a lot of these pots would have variations of amber, variations of green. So, and then we have the oddball things, what we call whimsies. No one in the world knows why there's only one cobalt blue fish bitters, or one cobalt blue Old Homestead Wild Cherry bitters, or only one Sazerac bitters. All three will be on display here, but there's only one each. Why was only one made? Now, of course, you could say maybe 10,000 of them are broken, but there's been no shards, no nothing. So we suspect at the end of the day, some of these glass blowers blew a special one to take home, maybe for their mom, maybe for their girlfriend, their wife, as a special gift to show their talent. Well, somehow, 3 of these bottles have survived. Actually, many of these bottles are survived, and they're whimsies, they're one-offs. Most of the bottles I'm discussing are very, very extremely rare.
Yeah.
Just like postage stamps, one damaged perforation, a tear, a stain decreases value. So these examples are the best of the best. There's no chips, there's no cracks. And of course, many bottles, and of course, a lot of us when we were children, we would take a BB gun or we'd take rocks and throw them at bottles. That's always happened. Yeah. You know, that just doesn't happen now. So what happens is when you find a complete bottle in the eave of a barn, in a built-in wall that someone hid of your house, under the porch out back of an older house, of course.
Grandpa's old cough medicine.
Grandpa's old cough medicine. These bottles were usually sometimes with contents, usually had the cork in them. Of course, they all had paper labels at one time, but that's the first thing that goes. Very rarely do you find paper labels, but there are some, and that's just extremely rare. It's exciting.
It sounds very exciting, and I'm so excited that it's going to be here in Houston. So everybody listening to this, everybody who sees any of our promotion for it, can come see not just the bottles from different eras, but those one-off bottles that you mentioned that this is the only place you're going to be able to see them, because they're here. There's not multiples. They're going to be here in Houston right now. It's your only place to see them. My follow-up question to the cobalt blue and to the ambers and all the different colors is, how did they make the glass that color? If somebody wanted cobalt blue, how would they make the glass cobalt blue?
I've written a series of articles in the past, but there's all kinds of chemicals and ingredients that you put in glass to make it the colors, okay? And it's just like anything, making Easter egg colors. It's a matter of combining certain minerals and things to make a color. Just like your famous gem gallery here, all those gems are different colors and shapes and sizes and consistency. Each one of them was impacted by some other type of mineral next to it, and water, and in some cases, sun. Yeah. Okay. In some of our cases, sun can affect the bottles, and you'll see some bottles that started out as clear that they've now turned purple. It's called sun-colored amethyst. Of course, there's counterfeit bottles, just like any kind of hobby, but we're professionals. The Federation of Historical Bottle Collectors, we're a nonprofit organization. We're international. We're going to have this exposition. It's the only time in the past 50 years, only time ever that this quality of glass will be in one location. Not at the Corning Museum of Glass, not at the Henry Ford, not at DuPont, not at Winterthur, not at the Getty, but at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Thanks to the generosity of the CEO and president, Joel Barch, he is our benefactor and sole guardian angel for this exposition. He's a collector himself of many different areas, and he's actually the keynote speaker, featured speaker at our Dinosaurs Banquet in the famous Hall of Paleontology here at the museum.
That's really, really cool.
What's really great about this, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people like history. Yeah. So having the exposition here in Houston, in the museum district, where there's 17 other museums within walking distance, where you have the Hall of Paleontology, you have the Butterfly Center, you have the King Tut exhibits. Yeah. We are in, a dream location to have this, because a few steps in any direction we're in history. And
Yes.
that's our common thread in this hobby, is history and learning what came before us, what's going to
Exactly.
come after us.
Yes.
And that's the important thing. And I'm so glad you're letting me talk about this, because there will be a next generation.
Yep.
These collections will have no value, or even education-wise or anything, unless we bring in a new generation of collectors. Most collectors nowadays, as you know, are interested in what's on their phone and things that aren't tangible. So we need to make sure this new generation of collectors out there know that come to the museums. These are the places you'll not see something online.
Yeah.
In many cases, you'll be able to touch something, to see something up close, things that you'll never see anywhere else.
Absolutely. You touched on a lot of things that get me all jazzed up. One of the things is, fascinatingly enough, one of the newer generations, Gen Y or Gen Z or whatever, as it happens, it turns out that a lot of them, they are the number one buyers and traders of cassette tapes. They're figuring out that there's nothing on this phone screen. There's nothing tangible here. So the younger generation is actually, it's promising that it seems like they're yearning for something tangible. I almost want to touch you, make sure you're real here. They're yearning for that real tangible thing, so they're getting back into cassette tapes. If you see cassette tape sales right now, it's up to like 2% of all physical media, which it used to be 0.1% since the 80s. But speaking of the 80s, this is the real question I want to ask you. Is you talked about the bottles and what they represent through time. It's not just that it's a bottle from 1865. So it's not just this bottle on your shelf, it is 1865 on your shelf.
Right.
And it's making you go back and making you think what was going on in the country, going on in the world at this time. When you collect an item, it's not just about the item, it's about its place in time and preserving that space in time, in my opinion.
We constantly use the story or the line, every bottle has a story. And our virtual museum has the story behind every one of these bottles. And many of them talk about the birth of our country, our founding fathers, the development of railroads. Every possible thing that's ever happened in America has been commemorated on a historical flask and sold to people. But what's interesting, we were just talking about Generation Z, Generation X, whatever they're called at this moment. There was a few years of fear that we had that this generation wasn't collecting. We are totally wrong. When you look at Comic-Con and you look at some of the big conventions and you see that there are full of younger people collecting. So let's not make the mistake of thinking that the younger generation doesn't collect. The thing about antique bottles is we're in a niche that people don't know about. You can collect guns and bullets and belt buckles and Civil War items and hats and quilts and every possible thing in the world. But who would to think about collecting antique bottles? Well, there's a group of us that do, and it's one of the fastest growing collecting niches in the country because of its beauty. Every piece tells a story. Every piece is different. No two pieces are the same.
And the intrinsic appeal of how fragile they are. That you're looking for this holy grail of a complete bottle. We can find shards of things. It's kind of like finding dinosaur fossils in the field. You find pieces and we can put them together, and that's great. You can put together one femur from various scattered bits of it that's been eroded over time. So it's similar to bottles. You mentioned, we also used to break bottles as kids or throw bottles at You imagine a saloon in 1875 in the Old West, full of tequila, and then a barroom brawl, and they throw the things. So if you find a tequila bottle from 1875, Mexico City, whatever, that is a very unique thing. That is telling the story of Mexico City, 1875. This bottle survived the saloon and survived all that rowdy lifestyle. So I can understand the appeal of the collection because you're not just looking for the shards of it. You probably collect shards, of course.
Sure, people do.
But it's that, maybe I'll find the complete bottle. Maybe what will happen upon a complete bottle. So that appeal of it is making me want to collect bottles. And it's making me think of I've seen on like American Pickers. I'm seeing you watch it. I love American Pickers. Sometimes they'll find these glass pieces in the owner of the property or the heir to the property. I had no idea. And it's these isolators for telephone line poles and things like
insulators.
Insulators. That's what I'm looking for. Insulators. And you wouldn't think they probably made millions of these over the course of time.
Good point.
And some insulators, and he's looking at the color and the bubbles and like how this was blown and how this was made or manufactured, where it came from. That's something as innocuous as an insulator would be so collectible and even so valuable in some occasions?
Well, old Coke bottles, old fruit jars, just amazingly collectible. Yeah, glass is glass. Glass is beautiful. So yes, insulators are extremely collectible. I have a whole window of them in my house. It's a different niche, but totally part of our organization. Many of us, when we were kids, used to shoot BB guns at the insulators or find them along old railroad tracks.
Yeah.
Even now, when I drive along old country roads and I see a raised area with vines growing over it and maybe some old telephone poles not being used anymore, I'm carefully looking for that rail line, and I'm carefully looking for any surviving poles, maybe in the woods, where I can travel down that path and find some insulators.
Here's a good final question before we do all the plugs and tell people where to come and see all these great pieces. If someone is looking to collect glass, can you guide us on where we would look? Where to find? You mentioned you're looking for vine-covered old roads and different poles and things like that, and barns and the pits that used to be out behind these glass-blowing factories and everything. Where would people even begin to try to look for old glass? I'm just going to call it old glass.
The first thing I would recommend is you join the Federation of Historic Bottle Collectors. We have a magazine that comes out. It's bi-monthly. It's 72 pages, full color, sent to all members. And we have a website, a virtual museum. We have webinars once a month. We have an auction price report where you can enter any bottle you want and search for the price of it that's sold in the past 10 years. So we have all kinds of benefits. But if you really wanted to start on your own without joining anything, I would suggest you just go to some antique shops. Or go dig at an old construction site if you can get in there. I have to caution you, though, you don't want to go on private property.
Right.
You don't want to go on government or state land or anything like that. A couple decades ago, you could get by with that, but not anymore.
Yes.
It's very, very tricky. So I certainly would join the Federation first, and that will inspire you of all the different areas. We haven't even talked about marbles. You know, marbles is another niche.
That's another episode.
Yeah, it's another episode. So there's Coke bottles. I mean, there are tens of thousands of people that just collect Coke bottles. You would think Coke bottles, there were dozens of different molds. Every little town had their own manufacturing and name that made a Coke bottle. And of course, Coke wasn't always named Coke. There were different names of it before it went to Coke. Dr. Pepper's based here in Texas. Huge group of people that collect old Dr. Pepper bottles. And of course, it's the ephemera that goes with it. The old advertising, the old posters, the old trade cards, anything that went with it. You can actually put together collections of memorabilia and have your bottle centerpiece, and you can have it like a stage. The entire surrounding is go-withs that go with it. Sometimes there were ashtrays, you know, made for it. All kinds of weird little things.
Magnifiers for reading.
Bottle openers, magnifying glasses, all kinds of things. Ice picks to get the cork out.
Oh yeah.
You know, you can find the names on some of these old brands. But very exciting. Of course, none of these entities are around anymore. Every once in a while, you find a company that's still around, but that's very, very rare. They've usually changed their name. You know, maybe they're General Mills now, and maybe 150 years ago it was Mr. Mill or something like that. But and we do have his bottles. So
I said final question. I have a final.
Now you can have as many questions as you like.
I got my family here with a toddler and my little infant, so I got to check in on them in a minute. Was glass ever used as currency? I would imagine no, but I want to be shocked by the answer maybe, because it seems like such a fragile thing.
That's a fascinating question. The exhibition here is American Antique Glass Masterpieces. So the key word, the operative word is American.
Yeah.
But glass wasn't invented in America. Glass happened way before America was even a country or even started. It came from England. And where did it come from before then? The Middle East. So you can go back in some of the old tombs and you can find glass bottles and utilities. And you think, my goodness, this was made thousands of years ago. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of history that takes us all the way back.
But I'm thinking, was there ever an image of Nero printed on a glass coin, or like we mentioned marbles? Was glass ever used? Hey, I want this. I want this spice. Can I pay you in 3 glass balls for worth X amount each?
I believe glass was more of a utility item at that time, and they had just discovered for many years the use of coins and tokens and stuff. But a lot of times the glass was very simple. It wasn't embossed yet with images, and it wasn't embossed with copy yet. It was usually just a beautiful color. I'm sure they used glass when it was used for windows and stained glass for churches. It was used, in barter systems because bartering was really important back then, but never as currency that I'm aware of.
Is glass a fluid?
Glass is a fluid, yeah.
That's so
Most people don't realize that. There's an article in one of our magazine issues this past year. It's called I think, the wonderful scientific mysteries of glass, but it's a fluid. It's just in a very subtle state of rigidity at the moment. So.
I remember seeing history books in different programs about glass, where the glass is melting around the pane, sort of, and it makes you think. We think glass is this solid thing in many ways.
Glass is actually always moving.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize that, and that's why some of the older windows do have ripples in them and stuff like that. We have an event at our house on July 31st. It's called Peach Ridge Glass in the Grass. It's a Houston 24 pre-event where dealers come out and sell glass from the backs of their cars under tents. We have it catered by a local Houston taco truck. We have horse rides and stuff, but it's our pre-event for Houston 24. And I've warned people, they go, Houston, why are you having this in Houston? First of all, I say to them, Houston's the coldest city in the country in July and August. They look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah, I'm looking at you like that right now.
Our air conditioning is so great that you see people in my office wearing sweaters, our airport wearing sweaters. I'm constantly at places where people are asking me, I wish I could borrow your sweater or wear a sweater. So just don't play golf in the middle of the day.
Right.
Just don't go jogging in the middle of the day. If you want to do your gardening, like I do every day, if you want to go for your jog, like I do in the morning with my dogs and stuff like that, do it in the morning. Houston's a wonderful place up till about noon. Now, you mentioned the fluidity of glass. I tell people jokingly, by about 2 o'clock, we're going to be shutting down our Glass in the Grass event because I think the glass would melt.
Yeah.
Just don't go in the sun.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's do let's wrap things up with all the plugs. What's going on at the museum and what's going on at the Hotel ZaZa?
Okay. The exhibition here starts on August 1st at 1 p.m. where both exhibitions open. That same evening, Thursday night at Hotel ZaZa, that's our host hotel. We actually have 2 host hotels. We have a bottle competition. It's called the Texas Hold'em. And what we're having there is we have 3 categories. One of them is insulators, one is best soda bottle, and one is best medicine bottle. People will submit their best bottles. There'll be 3 judges, and there'll be a first, second, and third place awarded. That'll be on the 11th floor of Hotel ZaZa. It's catered, and there'll be a cash bar. It's open to anyone. You don't have to be a Federation member. On Friday morning, we have our membership breakfast. We have our seminars. We have 3 unique seminars on Friday morning, and early admission starts at Hotel ZaZa at 1 p.m. There are people that pay a premium come in to the show from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock. We shut down for about an hour, and that evening we have our Dinosaurs Banquet at the Houston Museum of Natural Science Hall of Paleontology. There we have people coming in from all over the country. It's catered by Cafe Natalie, a local catering firm that's a favorite of the museum here, actually. On Saturday, we have general admission. That's $5, where you can actually come and see all this stuff yourself. You can bring bottles you have at home, and we'll appraise them for you. No cost at all. So if you found something and you don't know what the cost is, bring it in. We'll help you out. Who knows what you have? And this happened just a month ago in our auction that occurs on Saturday night. Some fellow that lives in a little town outside of Dallas sent me a little bottle. It was only the size of maybe my thumb. It was cobalt blue. It was a druggist named E.C. Patton, and it had on there Dallas, Texas.
Cool.
There's only 1 bottle known of that, and he asked me what it was worth. He needed some money. I made him a quick offer. He agreed. I told him the value of it. He sent it to me, and it's going to be in our auction. So you'll be able to buy this. But that's just it. It was just found recently, only this big. Dirty, messy, but a lot of people, this is the interesting thing, they'll opt to keep their bottle natural, but there's many people who opt to clean their bottle. You can do what's called tumbling. where they remove the exterior debris and interior debris, but you have to be careful because you can take away some of the embossing. Most people prefer some type of solution and bottle brush to take away the built up calcium and things of that sort that get in any type of object that's buried. Many times it's just bugs and spiders and old webs and dead things in there.
Is it a no-no to just assume to clean it? Or when somebody finds a bottle, should they clean it with, taking as much care as possible, or should they just leave it?
Well, just like anything you find, whether it's in a canoe in an old lake, a prehistoric bone or anything, you want to make sure when you bring it to natural air and light again, you take care of it. So when it's been in the ground for, 100 years or so, you don't want to bring it to hot water. Obviously, you don't want to put it in the dishwasher. You want to very gently take care of it. You don't want to put it in a window that has hot sun in the afternoon where it may be cool in the morning, because once that glass temperature changes, a tiny imperfection in that old glass could start a fissure or a crack in there. So you have to be very careful.
Other than my wife, I can't think of anything more beautiful than a sunset or a sunrise coming through some found glass.
Oh, it's amazing. My whole house, if you go to my website, peachridgeglass.com, I put every window on the website, and each room has been decorated by a different type of early American glass. Floor to ceiling. We don't have curtains because we don't have neighbors. We have a lot of property. Every window changes all day long. And just like stained glass, it goes to sleep at night. You don't see it. Now, up north, where you have basements and things like that, we don't have basements in Houston. The water table's too high. We use our windows, okay? And I like natural glass. Of course, you have to be careful a little bit because the sun and blue sky inhibit how you look at glass. Even your eyes reflect on how you look at glass. As we get older, typically males and elderly people have more trouble seeing yellows. There's people that are colorblind, all kinds of things. So glass is in the beauty of the beholder. But yes, to sit in a room and look at my bottles and to know that they will look different in 10 minutes will be amazing. And not only that, sometimes the bottles catch the light of the sun hitting and it will cast beautiful reflections on the wall. I have one house in my house that's just aquamarine bottles that when the sun hits it, it casts a rainbow on the opposite wall. Roy G. Biv right on my wall. It's amazing.
And I know we're going on long here. I got to wrap it up, but it just, every day it's different because the way the sun is moving in the sky, you're getting a brand new show every single day. Every hour is every minute is different than the one before.
What? You're exactly right about that. And like any of us, we move things around. You buy a new bottle, it fits in. This bottle may want to go over there. So I'm constantly moving around. Every bottle talks to its neighbor. So it's really interesting. So my exhibit is like a beach. It's constantly changing with the ebb and flow of tide. And that's the beauty of collecting bottles. The problem, I collected stamps all my life, and the problem with collecting stamps, and I love them, many of the same things we've talked about, history and beauty and different colors and all kinds of stuff, but they're in albums. They're in many albums and they're in a cabinet. And I only look at them on rainy days.
You get to bring them out.
I can be in a depressed mood or a sad mood or be walking through a room, glance at my window, and my total outlook changes. My breath is taken away every hour, just as you say, of the day. Never fails. Every person that comes in my house, when we have a lot of antiques and things, they immediately go to the windows because glass, when there's light behind it, is magical.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, man.
Yes. We'll do a fist bump.
Yeah.
That was great. And whenever I
sweat.
Yep.